this film, we will continue our review of notable student-produced films and case studies with a look at the student-produced films of the United Nations Development Programme's Equator Prize. This amazing project saw Columbia graduate students travel to film with Indigenous and community leaders in 20 countries around the world and produce films on nature-based solutions for the issues of climate change and ecosystem degradation. Our student producers then followed these leaders on their trip to New York City, where their projects were celebrated during the 2019 UN Climate Week. In this film, we'll tell this remarkable story and also explore the work of activist filmmaker Paul Redman, who leads the groundbreaking organization If Not Us, Then Who. We'll discuss with Paul and our student producers the role of film and video in driving social change. In the spring of 2019, a group of Columbia graduate students were commissioned by the United Nations Development Programme to lead an unprecedented experiment in community filmmaking. They would receive a crash course in visual storytelling and then travel to engage with community groups around the world who'd been chosen to receive awards for their work in combating climate change.
The Equator Prize is a prize that the United Nations Development Program Equator Initiative team gives out every 2 to 3 years to incredible examples of local Indigenous climate mitigation, adaptation, or work in new economies.
There's so much that people need to learn from a lot of these Indigenous groups about how to care for land and how to care for water in the air. And so the purpose of the Equator Initiative and this entire massive project is really how can we take those innovative solutions and those ideas on the ground at the grassroots level, and how can we amplify those to a greater level.
Greg Francois traveled to Brazil to meet with members of the Casigi tribe, who had been able to reclaim their ancestral homeland from farmers and ranchers.
Here in central Brazil, in an area surrounded by lands degraded by agribusiness and chemicals, the Casigi use soil-enriching crops to rebuild their environment.
Addie Thompson traveled to Borneo, where she was welcomed by leaders of the Dayak Iban, who'd been resisting loggers and oil companies for more than 50 years.
Masalah yang dihadapi Sungai Utik pada saat ini yaitu belum adanya pengakuan dari pemerintah untuk legalitas wilayah adat Sungai Utik.
Lawan kami untuk ketan ke menua, kami nak orang nebang kayu di Galugiang. Dan orang kulu kiri di Galugiang semua, kami dituk nak. Nebang kayu ni kita untuk derimpu pembangunan derimpu ngadai dijual.
I've learned so much through this project about the regenerative capacity of nature and the ways that we can, abundance and positivity around allowing nature to take over and kind of allowing nature to grow further. And nature can actually solve a lot of our climate problems if we let it.
Researcher Samantha Chan traveled to the Great Rift Valley of Tanzania to meet with the Hadzabe, a group of traditional hunter-gatherers, leading the world's first carbon credit finance preservation scheme.
In central Tanzania, Hadzabe hunter-gatherers have partnered with international organizations to create one of the world's largest climate financing operations.
Hewa hii inaweza kusaidia kupunguza hali ya hewa ya tabia nchi. Kwa hiyo mtunze hii miti ina faida yake.
The Hadzabe have many incentives to conserve their forests as hunter-gatherers. This is where they get their food, this is where they get their medicine, everything that they need. Now, with Carbon Tanzania, they have an extra financial mechanism where they get paid for all the trees that aren't cut down.
In the fall of 2019, these global Indigenous and community leaders all came to New York City to be part of the United Nations Climate Week. The collective project was documented in the film Local Heroes.
Hata sijaona hata mtu. Kitu ninachoona watu wanaishi juu ya nyumba ya mwenzake. Mimi nilikuwa nafikiri dunia unatembea unafika mwisho. Kumbe dunia inazunguka hivi kama mpira, kwa hiyo haina mwisho. Hewa ya Tanzania inaweza kuja Marekani na hewa ya Marekani inaenda Tanzania, kwa sababu kwa hiyo dunia ni kitu kimoja.
During the 2019 Equator Prize, a global audience tuned in as these leaders took the stage.
This was coinciding with Climate Week of 2019. We had 44 different Indigenous leaders from all over the world coming together. It was an incredible opportunity for these communities to gain an international stage and to start to tell their story in a louder way to a broader audience. Every single person from that stage that's going home is going home to continue their incredible work, and that work's not going to stop.
In 2015, award-winning documentary filmmaker Paul Redman had an idea: to create a nonprofit dedicated to helping Indigenous groups around the world tell their own stories.
I mean, I'm a filmmaker at heart, and so If Not Osun, who is a content development organization. We develop media content with Indigenous leaders, in partnership with Indigenous leaders. The idea being that we use this media content to help to inform decision makers about the needs of Indigenous peoples. So Indigenous peoples aren't seen as victims in climate catastrophes, but heroes in the battle to protect the climate.
In 2019, the If Not Us Then Who coalition would partner with the UN's Equator Prize, teaming up student producers with experienced camera people. If Not Us Then Who has also supported the work of Indigenous filmmakers, such as Keenan of the Dayak Iban of Borneo.
We filmed in that community in 2014, and out of this comes Keenan, right, a 14-year-old Dayak who decides all of a sudden to pick up a camera. He can tell the authentic, real story of what it is to be a Dayak, and that's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to get authentic Indigenous stories at a time when these cultures are significantly under threat. And I think it's really vital that this lived experience is accumulated into educational tools that is easily accessible, globally available, and done in many languages, so Indigenous communities can leapfrog from how do we solve this to solving it in a much shorter space of time without relying on international support, without relying on somebody flying in to help them out. They can do it themselves.
If Not Us Then Who's videos have been seen by more than 5 million people on YouTube. The group has anchored important events that unite Indigenous activists from around the world.